أمد يدي إلى جميع القيادات.
فكما يرفض تيار المستقبل أن يكون على صورة حزب الله.
Good afternoon and thank you for joining us on FutureTV. I'm Linda Naeem and these are today's top stories. 8 people are killed in 2 suicide bombings targeting the Iranian Cultural Center in Beirut's southern suburbs, an attack once again claimed by an al-Qaeda-linked group. Former Prime Minister Saad Hariri is in Cairo for talks with Egypt's Army Chief and Defense Minister Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. And Egypt's ousted President Hosni Mubarak and his 2 sons appear before a Cairo court. 8 people have been killed in 2 suicide bombings that went off near the Iranian Cultural Center in Beirut's southern suburbs, an attack claimed by the al-Qaeda-linked Abdullah Azzam brigades. Health Minister Wael Abu Faoud says over 100 people were injured in the attack. Abu Faoud says human remains found in the area likely belong to the bombers, but the Army Command asked the families of those missing to head to Al-Rasul Al-Azam Hospital on the airport road to carry out DNA tests. The Army says the first blast was caused by around 70 kilograms of explosives and mortars stashed in a Mercedes carrying a fake license plate. The second explosion went off in a BMW X5, which was loaded with 90 kilograms of explosives and mortars. The Kuwaiti embassy, which lies in the area, says none of its staff was injured in the attack. For its part, the Iranian embassy says there were no severe injuries among the diplomats and the staff at the cultural center. Lebanese officials reaffirmed their commitment to fighting terrorism after an al-Qaeda-linked group claimed responsibility for the attack. The Future Parliamentary Bloc has condemned the latest bombings in Bir Hassan while praising the formation of a new government. After its weekly meeting, the group said the phase of the new cabinet will serve as a transition period that will end with Hezbollah's withdrawal from Syria. They say this will help restore normalcy to Lebanon, which will bolster efforts to build the state and regain the people's trust in it. They added the government should come up with a ministerial statement that must be based on the Baghdad Declaration and stressed the government should help restore stability and revive the economy. More importantly, the bloc says the cabinet should focus its attention on staging the presidential elections that would help lead Lebanon to a new phase during which it can tackle national problems. Joining me on the line is political analyst Carol Malouf. Ms. Malouf, thank you for joining us today.
Having me.
Despite the formation of the new government, stability in the country remains a dream given today's attack, which was the latest in a series of bombings. More lives are claimed each time. What's going on in the country?
The problem is that Hezbollah's involvement in Syria has cultivated an arch enemy known as Al-Qaeda. And we all know that Al-Qaeda is a mercurial franchise idea that would be very difficult to crush. So having the same enemy today by fighting along the regime in Syria has proven that Hezbollah has a new enemy, and that enemy has been imported to Lebanon due to that involvement. Now, if we want to talk in political terms, we all know that a government of national coalition is not the answer. The answer is Hezbollah's withdrawal from Syria, which is highly unlikely after the latest statements of its Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah vowing to continue fighting alongside the regime in Syria.
Excuse me, I was going to ask you about this. Can you comment exactly, because he was saying that, he reiterated his party will carry on its mission in Syria no matter what. What do you think will happen? Do you think that if another attack occurs, do you think Hezbollah could be potentially pressured to withdraw from Syria?
I believe we're looking at a long-term Iraqization of Lebanon, if I might say. It will be a long series of tit-for-tat, bombings in both camps. We, unfortunately, have been calling on Hezbollah since its involvement and announcement of fighting in Qusair to abide by the Baghdad Declaration, which they have agreed and signed on, which calls for, the impartiality of Lebanon and not having any fighting or any side fight in Syria. That hasn't happened. And since then, Hezbollah has not abided by any government or presidential decisions to abide by that declaration. And we have since then witnessed several bombings targeting Hezbollah strongholds, whether in Dahye or in Hermel. I believe Hezbollah has now two enemies, an enemy in Israel and a local franchised enemy called Al-Qaeda.
Lebanese officials, namely Finance Minister Ali Hassan Khalil, are talking about combating terrorism in the country. You know, could we fear, like you were saying, we might be going into or turning into a new Iraq? What are your comments on that? How could this be solved?
I think Hezbollah has to reevaluate its decision in its fighting in Syria. My question to the public opinion today is, have there been such claims of terrorist organizations in Lebanon before clearly Hezbollah was involved in Syria? I mean, we saw the fire and we decided to play with it, as we say in Lebanese slang. And then we say, well, we're getting burnt. Of course we're going to get burned if we keep on playing with fire. The solution to this is what the late Minister Mohammed Shatah had planned or was planning, was the 1701 resolution closing all Lebanese borders. Unless we close the border incoming and outgoing on our northern border to Syria, I believe these bombings will keep on taking place.
What about the Al-Qaeda linked group Abdul Azam brigades who are currently in Lebanon? What do you do with them, the people who are already here?
Cultivating resentment among a vast population, whether through inciting rhetoric, through speeches by Hassan Nasrallah himself, or through videos on YouTube calling on the destruction of certain cities, like today the one we see about Yabrud in Syria, does cultivate some hatred towards Hezbollah. Let's be very honest and clear about things. This type of rhetoric does not help anyone. Unless Hezbollah really returns back to its senses and to its Lebanese constituency and to the other Lebanese constituencies who are paying the price, the civilians are paying the price for all this fighting, I don't believe we can, crush any Al-Qaeda affiliate. Again, Al-Qaeda is a franchise. Any group of people can get together and, pledge allegiance to its leader. This is, when you cultivate hatred, you get hatred in return. What happened today and all the bombings are condemned. This is a tragedy, and we need to look at the core problem. And as a government of national coalition, in my opinion, is not the solution. The solution is to go back to the Ba'abda Declaration and close the Lebanese border and have all fighters, arrested from both sides.
Okay, but as long as Hezbollah is still in Syria, do you think attacks could target other areas in Lebanon? Or is it only Hezbollah strongholds?
So far, indications have shown that the targets of the terrorists have been Hezbollah strongholds in Hermel and in Dahye. Unfortunately, it's very sad that most or if not all the casualties are Lebanese civilians, and this is a toll that the Lebanese citizens are paying a very high price for that Hezbollah's involvement in Syria.
In fact, and do you think peace could ever be achieved in this country? What is your opinion here?
When we put Lebanese interests first, when we put our national interests before regional and international interests first, we sit on a table, we set our priorities right, we discuss openly, we have some truth and reconciliation among the parties, then yes, there can be peace. But as long as we are the decisions are being quote unquote cooked in different cities, whether regional or international, then we will, I don't think the Lebanese will be able to sit and talk.
Political analyst Carol Malouf, thank you so much for being with us today. Former Prime Minister Saad Hariri held talks with Egypt's Army Chief and Defense Minister Abdel Fattah al-Sisi during a visit to Cairo. Hariri arrived in Egypt late last night for a two-day visit, heading a Future Movement delegation comprised of MPs Samir Jisr and Jamal Jarrah, former MPs Bassem Sabah and Ghattas Khouri, and Hariri's advisors Radwan al-Sayed and Nader Hariri. The former MP is expected to meet with senior Egyptian officials, including President Adli Mansour and Foreign Affairs Minister Nabil Fahmy. Discussions will focus on developments in the region and opportunities to develop bilateral relations between the two countries. Last month, Hariri praised the Egyptian referendum for a new constitution, saying it was a great accomplishment for the Egyptian people. Coming up next, Microsoft launches OneDrive, the company's first free personal cloud storage device. That and more after the break. Welcome back. Egypt's South's President Hosni Mubarak and his two sons are appearing before a Cairo court, facing charges that they wasted millions of dollars in public funds allocated to renovate presidential palaces. Today's session is the first in the case after a months-long pause. The trial initially opened in August, but the court sent it back to the prosecutor general, who added 4 new defendants. The state media says they held management positions in the project. Last year, the ailing president was sentenced to life imprisonment on charges of failing to stop the killing of protesters during the 2011 uprising that forced him from office. His sentence was cancelled on appeal, and he is now facing a retrial. He appeared in court sitting in a wheelchair next to his sons. And now for news around the world in brief. Embattled Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych has told opposition leaders they have crossed the limits after a night of violence in the capital of Kiev left at least 25 people dead and many more injured, according to the health ministry. In a letter published on his website, Yanukovych accused opposition leaders of ignoring the basic principle of democracy. Saudi Crown Prince Salman bin Abdulaziz has arrived in Tokyo, Japan, from the Pakistani capital of Islamabad as part of an official visit to Japan, during which he will discuss strengthening Saudi-Japanese bilateral relations on all levels. The Saudi Crown Prince Salman bin Abdulaziz has met with Japan's Emperor Akihito and Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Colombia's president has dismissed the country's head of armed forces after he verbally maligned prosecutors and suggested action be taken against them in audio recordings obtained by a local news magazine. Reports say General Leonardo Barrero's phone conversation with a colonel who was imprisoned over possible links to extrajudicial killings was recorded by prosecutors investigating corruption by senior officers in allegedly inflated military contracts. Microsoft is announcing the worldwide availability of OneDrive, the company's free personal cloud storage device. Formerly known as SkyDrive, OneDrive gives people one place to store important photos, videos, and documents accessible on the devices they use every day. As part of the launch, Microsoft is giving 100,000 customers an additional 100 gigabytes of complimentary storage for 1 year. The new OneDrive offers a host of new features, including automatic camera backup for Android, new monthly payment plans and ways to expand storage, as well as improved video sharing and newly updated apps for Windows Phone, iOS, Android, and Xbox. OneDrive allows people to automatically back up photos, seamlessly integrate with Microsoft Office, and expand storage needs. Customers can also receive 3 gigabytes of free storage for utilizing the camera backup feature. This marks the end of our bulletin for today. Now for a recap of our top stories. 8 people are killed in 2 suicide bombings targeting the Iranian Cultural Center in Beirut's southern suburbs, an attack once again claimed by an al-Qaeda-linked group. Former Prime Minister Saad Hariri holds talks with Egypt's Army Chief and Defense Minister Abdel Fattah al-Sisi during a visit in Cairo. And former Prime Minister Saad Hariri is in Cairo. That's it from me and the news team here at Future Television. I'm Linda Tamim, wishing you all a very nice evening.
إني أمد يدي إلى جميع القيادات.
فكما يرفض تيار المستقبل أن يكون على صورة حزب الله